In the shadow of the pyramids, ancient Egypt was about to experience the 10th and final plague. It was midnight, and a terminal threat was sweeping across the land, targeting the firstborn of every household. To survive, the Israelites followed a specific set of instructions. They were to take a flawless lamb, sacrifice it, and paint its blood on the wooden doorframes of their homes. That blood acted as a signal for death to pass over that house. Inside, the families ate their meal in a state of constant readiness. They stood with cloaks tucked in, sandals on their feet, and staffs in their hands. They finished the roasted meat and unleavened bread in extreme haste. That rushed meal marked the end of 4 centuries of slavery. By dawn, the Hebrew people were walking out of Egypt, bursting into the sunlight as a newly freed population. That night of deliverance became the foundational memory for Israel. It established a permanent pattern of blood, bread, and survival that they would carry into the wilderness. In the desert, God commanded this rescue be memorialized. Every year, the people were required to repeat the Passover festival without fail. This coincided with the Feast of Unleavened Bread. For 7 days, families scrubbed every trace of yeast from their homes. Because yeast spreads and swells, its removal served as a physical reminder to put away sin and old habits. During that same week, they observed the Feast of First Fruits. As the spring barley ripened, farmers brought the very first sheaves of their harvest to the priests as an offering. Offering these initial yields was an act of faith. By handing over the first portion before the rest of the crop was even harvested, they acknowledged that the entire season's success depended on divine provision. For generations, Israel kept these cycles of animal sacrifice and grain harvesting. This constant repetition raises a question: were these events merely historical traditions, or were they a chronological countdown to something permanent? More than 1,000 years later, the setting shifts to Jerusalem. It is the exact legally mandated day of the Passover celebration. Jesus and his disciples gather in an upper room to observe the ancient choreographed meal, following the same laws their ancestors had obeyed for centuries. However, the accounts of this specific dinner reveal a significant detail. There is no mention of a physical roasted lamb being served on the table. Jesus takes the traditional elements and gives them a new context. He breaks the unleavened bread, bread free of yeast and corruption, and declares that it is his own body given for them. This meal moved the Passover from a memorial of the past into a present reality. On this night, the ancient requirements for a sacrifice centered entirely on Jesus himself as the final Passover lamb. Within hours, the timeline leads to the crucifixion. Christ's death fulfills the ancient requirement of the lamb's blood, acting as the ultimate covering for sin. The chronological alignment continues through the weekend. Jesus rises from the grave on the 3rd day, which was the exact day of the ancient Feast of First Fruits. The connection is precise. Just as ancient farmers offered the first cut of barley to secure a future crop, Christ emerged from the tomb as the first fruit of those who have died. His resurrection serves as the initial yield. It provides the physical guarantee that a future resurrection for all of humanity will follow. For over 1,000 years, the spring harvest had followed this exact pattern. The ancient farmers were practicing the very steps that would eventually define the victory over death. The timeline advances exactly 50 days later to the Feast of Weeks, commonly known as Pentecost. This feast traditionally marked the conclusion of the grain harvest. It required a massive gathering in Jerusalem, with Jews from every nation present to celebrate the year's bounty. On this specific day, the Holy Spirit arrives upon the apostles. They begin to speak in languages that allow the entire multilingual crowd to understand their testimony. The Old Testament focused on the physical harvest of wheat. In the New Testament, this event resulted in 3,000 people being added to the church in a single afternoon. At Pentecost, the agricultural cycle reached its final transition point. The activities in the grain fields were mirrored by the gathering of people into a new spiritual community. These timelines show a direct correlation. The Old Testament feasts align day for day with the New Testament. The liberation from physical slavery in Egypt provided the exact map for liberation from spiritual bondage. Every event was anchored to the same dates.
This follows a fundamental law of agriculture. For a harvest to occur, a single seed must first go into the ground and die. Christ embodies this law. He acted as the seed planted in the earth to bring forth an eternal spiritual crop. The alignment of these dates suggests that biblical history and the rhythms of the earth were never separate. They functioned as an integrated system where every harvest pointed toward the same destination.